On the early morning of September 23, 2015, Mark van Dongen, a 28-year-old engineer, was found by his neighbors, standing in the street in his underwear, screaming in agony. His skin was visibly peeling off, and parts of his body were described by witnesses as melting. At first, the neighbors believed it might have been a prank, or possibly even the result of a wild animal attack, until they realized the extent of the man's injuries. The smell of chemicals in the air made it clear something more sinister had occurred. Mark had been attacked with concentrated sulfuric acid. The victim had rung a neighbor's doorbell for help. That doorbell, made of metal, would later become a chilling symbol of the brutality of the attack, corroded permanently by the acid still on his skin when he reached for help. Mark was in horrific pain. As emergency services were called, bystanders began to piece together what had happened. One neighbor noted that Mark was foaming at the mouth, while another said he couldn't even recognize the man at first, but Mark was still conscious. Despite the pain, he was able to tell the people around him who had done this to him, his ex-girlfriend, Berlinah Wallace. Mark's injuries were extreme. The acid had caused severe burns to his face, chest, arms, and legs. His eyes were already damaged. One of his irises was later found to have dissolved completely. Witnesses described his skin coming off in large pieces, hanging from his body. Mark and Berlinah began their relationship in 2010. At the time, Mark was in his early 20s, a Dutch national who had moved to the UK to pursue his studies and work as an engineer. Berlinah was 20 years older, a fashion student in her 40s. Despite the significant age gap, the relationship developed and continued for several years. According to Mark's friends, the relationship was troubled and at times violent. They reported seeing Mark with scratches on his body on multiple occasions. He had told his friends that Berlinah could be aggressive and controlling. In one particularly disturbing incident, Berlinah had even poured boiling water on him while he was asleep. By August 2015, the relationship had broken down. Mark had decided to leave her. Around the same time, he began seeing another woman, which further escalated tensions between him and his ex. She was unable to accept the end of the relationship, and her behavior quickly became erratic and threatening. In early September, just weeks before the attack, Mark contacted the police and reported that Berlinah was harassing both him and his new girlfriend. She had repeatedly called the new girlfriend's phone to intimidate her. Mark also told the police that she had threatened to take her own life if he left her. In a conversation with his father, Mark shared that he was genuinely afraid she might hurt him. The police issued Berlinah a formal warning, instructing her to stop contacting him. But instead of stopping, her behavior grew more disturbing. On the very same day Mark reported her to the authorities, Berlinah used her computer to begin researching acid attacks. She read through dozens of cases online, around 82 in total, and searched for details about the effects of sulfuric acid on human victims. Later that day, she went on Amazon and purchased a bottle of concentrated sulfuric acid. Berlinah's online activity would later become a key piece of evidence in the criminal investigation, showing clear premeditation. Mark, unaware of the extent of Berlinah's planning, tried one last time to settle things peacefully. On the evening of September 22nd, he visited her flat. According to reports, he hoped to clarify that their relationship was over and attempt to part ways on civil terms. He agreed to stay the night, a decision that would prove to be fatal. In the early hours of September 23, 2015, at approximately 3 a.m., Berlinah executed her plan. As Mark slept in the bed they had once shared, wearing only his underwear, she walked into the kitchen and retrieved the bottle of concentrated sulfuric acid she had purchased weeks earlier, poured some of it into a cup, and returned to the bedroom. Before throwing the acid, she said, "If I can't have you, no one can." She then hurled the liquid directly into Mark's face and upper body. The effects were catastrophic. Mark woke up screaming, his body burning in excruciating pain. The acid had begun to eat through his skin within seconds, causing devastating injuries. Instead of calling for help, Berlinah stayed inside the flat and phoned a friend, doing nothing to help Mark. He was taken to hospital in critical condition. Police officers who responded to the scene quickly located Berlinah at her flat. She was found sitting on her sofa and was arrested at the scene. She denied everything and later attempted to shift the blame onto Mark himself. Berlinah claimed that she thought she was throwing a glass of water, not acid, and falsely accused Mark of trying to harm her. These claims would later be disproven by digital evidence, including Berlinah's search history, the removed label on the acid container, and testimony from Mark's friends and father. He lost sight in one eye, with severe damage to the other. His left leg had to be amputated due to restricted blood flow, and he would eventually lose nearly all physical mobility. He spent 4 months in a medically induced coma and would remain in intensive care for a total of 11 months. Mark's condition continued to deteriorate even after coming out of his coma. When he eventually regained consciousness, he had only limited movement in his mouth and tongue. He could no longer move his limbs and was left paralyzed from the neck down. To communicate, Mark used his tongue to point to letters on an alphabet board while his father helped spell out words. It was a painstaking and heartbreaking process. His father later recalled that when he first arrived at the hospital, he didn't even recognize his son. Mark's face had been so badly damaged by the acid that his father initially thought the doctors had brought him to the wrong room. The injuries had left Mark unrecognizable. Photographs of his condition were never released to the public, with authorities later stating that the images were too distressing. In November 2016, more than a year after the attack, Mark was transferred to a care home in Gloucester. He lasted just one night. The next morning, he phoned his father in distress, begging to be taken away. When his father arrived, he found Mark covered in his own waste and extremely agitated. Determined to give his son better care, Mark's family arranged for a private ambulance and had him transferred to a facility in Belgium. But his suffering didn't end there. Not long after his transfer, Mark developed a severe lung infection. Doctors told him that he would need a surgical procedure to insert a breathing tube, which would make it impossible for him to speak for the rest of his life. Communication with his father was one of his only remaining connections to the world. Facing the loss of communication altogether, he made the most devastating decision of all, to apply for euthanasia. Under Belgian law, euthanasia is legal in cases of unbearable physical or psychological suffering with no hope of recovery. Mark's application was reviewed and approved. On January 2, 2017, at the age of 29, Mark van Dongen passed away. His father was with him in his final hours. Berlinah Wallace's trial started in April 2018. She was charged with murder, as well as with applying a corrosive fluid with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. The prosecution's case focused on proving that Berlinah's actions were not only deliberate and premeditated, but also directly responsible for Mark van Dongen's death. However, because Mark had chosen euthanasia over a year after the attack, the case presented complex legal questions about causality and intent. During the trial, Berlinah pleaded not guilty to murder. She claimed that she believed the liquid she threw at Mark was water, not acid. She also alleged that Mark had placed the acid by the bedside in an attempt to get her to drink it, framing him as the aggressor. Berlinah further claimed that Mark had been abusive and controlling during their relationship. Here's a fragment of her lying and falsely blaming Mark during a police interview.
And Mark would have been the only person that could have put the acid in that glass.
Yeah, he did, because he said to me it was water. I've got water for you, like you come and take your medication and go to bed. He wanted me to burn my insides. Can you imagine?
The jury, however, was presented with overwhelming evidence contradicting her claims. Digital forensic experts revealed that Berlinah had conducted extensive online research into acid attacks, reading about dozens of previous cases. She had purchased the acid weeks in advance. Witnesses, including Mark's friends and colleagues, testified against her. The prosecution argued that Berlinah's actions before, during, and after the attack pointed to clear malicious intent. She had planned the attack, chosen a moment when Mark was most vulnerable, and then failed to assist him after throwing the acid. Instead of calling for help, she phoned a friend and left Mark to suffer alone. The judge later described Berlinah's behavior as premeditated, sadistic, and callous. She said Berlinah had intended to permanently disfigure and disable Mark so that he would no longer be desirable to anyone else. According to the sentencing remarks, Berlinah's statement to Mark, "If I can't have you, no one can," captured the cruel motive behind the attack. Ultimately, the jury acquitted Berlinah of both murder and manslaughter. However, she was found guilty of throwing a corrosive substance with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. In May 2018, Berlinah was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 12 years to be served before becoming eligible for parole.